Welcome back to Secret Weapons. My name is Mark Johnston, and if this is your first time here, this is a YouTube channel where we do gear demos and reviews, as well as studio tips and tricks for leveling up your writing, production, and mixing from the perspective of a guitar player working out of a home studio. If that's the kind of thing that would appeal to you, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button and stick around for future videos. Today we're taking a look at STL Tonality, Wes Borland. So I'm an elder millennial, which means I grew up on nu metal and rap rock. Limp Bizkit, one of the powerhouse acts of the early 2000s, was incredibly foundational on me and people my age getting into heavier music for the first time. So today we're taking a look at the Wes Borland signature plugin from STL, and it's really interesting because despite the fact that I did grow up on Limp Bizkit pretty heavily and have for a long time been a strong advocate that Wes Borland was a very, very talented and creative guitar player and stage performer and everything else, I never felt like that genre of playing really seeped that deeply into my playing dynamics and tendencies. I never really leaned hard into the nu metal roots that I kind of grew up in as a musician. And so the opportunity to use a plugin that is so clearly designed to emulate Wes's sound was an interesting challenge for me. And I'm sure based on that intro track, you can hear that I decided to take it in a very different direction. And to be fair, I do this pretty frequently when it comes to signature gear and signature plugins, because I make no secret about the fact that I am not a guitar player's guitar player. I'm not somebody with a kind of like strong sense of what the pantheon of guitar gods is supposed to be like, nor am I somebody who learns a lot of cover songs or really ever has. And so when the opportunity arises to pick up a piece of signature gear, my only frame to kind of look at it is through, will it do something that I want to do? And will it kind of accomplish my sonic needs from my own genre tendencies? This was a fun challenge for this video because a lot of plugins tend to have the edges sanded down a little bit, if you know what I mean. There's a sense of we want it to sound like the artist, but we really want it to sound pretty flexible so that other people can get their thing out of it. STL Tonality's Wes Borland feels like no edges have been sanded. The three amplifiers are very much those amplifiers as used in the Limp Bizkit and Wes Borland greater pantheon of music ways. The diesel amp is grindy and spitty and like has that really boomy nu metal sound to it. The 120 in this thing, the JC 120, has that cleanliness in spades and that massive low end once again. The pre-effects are literally just a big muff and a envelope controlled filter that only really does crazy stuff for the most part. I really liked it. I like that we're not soft shoeing around the weirdness of some of these effects. The post effects are really interesting as well. That Ibanez inspired chorus flanger has this crazy switch on it that just creates absolutely insane sounds. And of course, the added benefit of a piece of gear like this is its flexibility to be used in other workflows. Like we used it on all of our guitars in that intro, but that 909 electronic drum kit at the end of that track, I run through this plugin as well so that I can use some of the kind of like grit and body of the JC 120 style amplifier, as well as auto wah and some of the kind of delay stuff in the post effects in stereo. The weirdness gets really fun when you apply it to other things. This is not only a very realistic expression of Wes Borland's kind of signature sound, but it also ends up being a really interesting kind of creative toolkit that will kind of attempt to really drive you into some weirder spaces when you use it on other instruments in your production. So I would recommend that if you pick this up, you take a look at it on some other gear because you might be surprised. Let's run through it and kind of see what it does on guitar specifically. Okay, so let's start by just walking through the amplifiers. If you check out this plugin, you're obviously going to end up seeing a lot of like crazy presets at the outset. And so I think that the kind of best practice here is going to be kind of hearing it at its most normal before it gets really like mangled by all the insane effects and everything else. So we have my Balaguer Ambient Select Espada going into the high Z input on my Apollo X8P, and then going into the plugin, which is running as a standalone not in my DAW, which is Universal Audio's Luna. I find that guitar amp in a box or kind of like guitar rig plugins tend to have more latency when run inside of a DAW than when run like this, where it is standalone. So we are running into the input of the plugin, and then the outputs of the plugin, I can show you, are configured to be the line 5 and 6 outputs of the plugin, which are going into my DAW, which is Universal Audio's Luna. And so that's how we're getting this sound into the DAW without kind of like getting any additional latency or anything. Right now, we have the kind of broad strokes disabled. Neither of our kind of pre-amplifier stomp boxes are on. None of our post-amplifier stop boxes are on. We're just running the JC120 style amplifier and the matching cabinet with a 414 and a 121 ribbon on it, which is kind of a go-to sound for me, especially when I want something that's a little bit more kind of gentle sounding. For some of the heavier stuff, I'll use like a 57, and it's nice to have like a 414, a 121, and a 57 on all the cabinets for this thing. So let's start with this clean tone, and then hear some effects, and then we'll jump into some of the other amplifiers. So right off the bat, low input, let's jump to that high. Obviously you have kind of everything necessary here. You have both channels, you've got the distortion circuit if you want it. What's wild to me is the fact that you have a JC120 and something like this. You don't see JC120s very often, and that's largely because they're not a super commonplace thing outside of bands like The Cure and notably Limp Bizkit. Like Borland's like crazy like distortion tones with a JC120 are fascinating. We're gonna go ahead and ride master output a fair amount as we kind of roll through this. The headroom control is also an interesting addition. Let's jump back to something resembling a clean sound. Bring that bright switch back in. Bring that volume down just a hair so we're getting proper clean. Bring that headroom back up to accommodate. Like that, tiny bit of hair from the distortion. Let's jump over to our stomp boxes and kind of put together some weird This filter is an envelope filter with a really cool drive circuit. A very, very versatile amount of Q resonant. It's very sharp. which I used a ton on that intro track, especially at the outset, the like. All that stuff was high drive, pretty high Q, and I think we're in band pass, but you also have a high pass. And a low pass, of course. And you, of course, have a Big Muff style fuzz, volume, tone, sustain. And this over here is like an impedance control, where kind of at 100%, you have kind of a very traditionally real sounding. Start to get that starved sound, which is really, really cool. Which in turn, you'll typically want to increase tone and volume to kind of compensate for. That has that like really kind of, you know, the first few years that fuzz existed, violin-y kind of. But none of these devices are intended to be used in isolation. Let's jump back to bandpass. That is just wild. This is so like out of pocket for me, and I am here for it. Very, very emphatically here for it. Oh, before we forget, let's go back around and let's go ahead and smash the sustain a little bit more on this guy. Drop my pick. Yeah, it's pretty gnarly. Let's go ahead and disengage those two and jump over to our cabinet really quick, just so you can hear some of the kind of like effects of moving some mics around to pull up different IRs. a big roomy sound like that. And then you also have the option of going ahead and grabbing the balance of the two. What I really like is the option to add some like additional resonance, as well as the fact that you can high and low pass, and they can be linked, so as you high pass your speakers, you're not getting anything off kilter where one mic feels like it's lacking and the other one is not. And let's go ahead. And obviously you also have the ability to load IRs down here at the bottom. And you have myriad different, a Cali V30, the Zodiac cabinets, the Jazzmaster cabinet, or the Jazz Course cabinets, and then a couple additional options as well. We're going to stick with these for these clean tones and jump over to our wet effects, where we have, an MXR inspired delay, a Ibanez inspired chorus flanger with an additional kind of crazy switch on it, and the Wes Borland take on the DD. I'm going to say it's probably 5, but you've got, standard, analog, modulated, reverb, like delay plus reverb. Scroll up, there we go, tape, and warm and warp. So a bunch of great delay sounds in here as well as a little bit of reverb, but that's also going to be the only place that you can get reverb in this thing, which is interesting. Starting things off with that very Echoplexy style. Let's go to a very conventional 120 beats per minute and take our delay time to a dotted eighth, because that feels appropriate for this kind of voicing. Of course, you have your dry volume. Repeats or sustain. And all of your various time signatures, including very long, all the way up through 30-second note triplets. And of course, you can turn sync off, at which point you can tap in your tempo. Or freewheel it and set a millisecond amount. And let's go ahead and jump over to this WB7 chorus flanger modulation pedal. We have crazy turned off right now. We are in chorus mode. And there's no jazz chorus. There's no chorus in the jazz chorus. This is where you're going to get your chorus here. And it sounds so good in stereo. Let's do this. Everything just kind of like stacks together so well in this plugin. It's quite nice. Okay, let's take that back out and focus. So you have some really cool stuff. You've got, a ton of flexibility in your as well as, of course, a flanger. With regen. A lot of where my favorite stuff comes into play on this is this crazy mode, which just kind of supercharges all of these settings. Yeah, exactly. Again, the idea here being you just make something that's completely out of pocket and unhinged in a cool way. Yeah, it gets nuts. So with crazy, I think it gets a little too comic booky below noon, but you keep that speed nice and cranked and that depth nice and low. And you end up with some absolutely wild sounds. Okay, and let's take a look at the digital delay, this Boss voice delay that has all the various modes on it and everything. I love that in mono stereo operation, you have kind of a stereo width applied to both the Borland delay and the digital delay. For context, if you jump over to mono, and you can run stereo like proper or mono into stereo or MISO. Of course, you can go full wet with this as well. Oh no, you can't go full wet with this. You can go full wet with the Borland delay, but not the digital delay. But just get a ton of delay. Feedback. And you will get your runaways. Let's take it back down. Time is going to obviously reset. It's not going to do the like elasticy kind of thing. But you have a maximum of 2 seconds. And a bunch of great delay modes. We are in kind of digital right now. Let's go to analog. Jump back to sync. Modulated. Plus reverb, which is like an always wet one for some reason, but I think it's the effect level becomes the reverb. But one of the things that's really cool is for this one, you can take that time to 1 millisecond. And get this really washed out, dreamy thing, which I quite like. And again, let's go back to something weird really quick. Not that weird. Let's go to our flanger. Just gorgeous. It's nice that this thing can do really, really pretty things too. We have our tape. Warm. And warp. With memory. So in this wet mode, let's go ahead and put this all together a little bit, and then we'll take a look at some of those heavier amps. So here is our reverb. Let's go with a somewhat insane. There's a really cool thing in here where Like, that's not a sound I would dial in on my own almost ever, and yet it's so intensely cool. As you heard on that intro track, there's some really heavy amps, but there's also a lot of like interesting texture stuff. And the texture stuff is what really kind of made me confused at this plugin when I first got it. And then as I started writing with it and getting it into context, I realized how much I liked a lot of the sounds that you can pull out of this thing. Let's crank our bass down. I pass those cabinets a little bit more aggressively. That's a killer sound in context. It's so weird to hear that kind of stuff in isolation, but I really, really dig it in context. Let's go ahead, bypass some of our weirder effects. Actually, let's leave a little bit of reverb because I think the reverb in this thing is quite nice. Let's take our preamp effects off and let's listen to some of these other amplifiers to wrap things up. So we have been in this jazz chorus amp so far. And we are going to make the jump down to amp number 2, which is this Diesel VH4, a very chuggy, heavy amplifier, which is appropriate for who we're dealing with here. And let's grab the V30 with a 421 and a 57. But on the right one. We'll go back to mono just for this, for a little bit of focus. We're currently on channel 3. We can jump down to channel 1, and you basically have corresponding channels down this run with things like a bright toggle, presence, and deep controls. There's some great cleans in here with enough volume pressed through it. Each one is basically cascading increases of gain total available. which once again, in isolation, this is not the kind of amp I typically reach for. And then you hear it kind of in the context of a mix and you go, oh yeah, that's why. Yeah, you know, I'm not a chugger, but it's a fun sound. The presence has got a lot of crisp to it. I love cranking that deep control. Double tracking with that is just like a monstrous sound, which is really, really rad. And of course you can, as you saw earlier, you can mismatch the cabinet. So if you want, you can grab something like this totally unrelated cabinet. And get like really interesting kind of blends of different cabinets together, which is really nice. Speaking of the Zodiac, let's go ahead and jump over to the 414 and the 421 and amp 3, which is this Selmer Zodiac 50 watt MK2 amplifier. I have no idea what this amp is. Like, I've never even heard of this amp in real life. I don't know what it's supposed to sound like, but I know that it's got a bunch of really interesting features to it. So you have two channels once again. A volume. Two-band EQ on this first channel, low and high inputs. And then this second channel is the really interesting one. You have your two-band EQ, your volume control, and then you have this interesting sweep of kind of like switches. Let's go ahead and crank that volume a bit. Use the higher input. And then you have, basically it's like different like EQ settings. Contrabass, which is kind of this like low mid woofy thing, which is really cool. It's almost like it like highlights a specific realm of like mid-range, medium, and treble. And then high treble. It's like a resonance control. And then standard rotary. Which is one that I found myself reaching for a lot of those cleans as well on that intro. And then kind of grabbing these and softening it up a little bit on that side. Which once again, there's kind of like a really focused sound there. that translates really well in this context.